What's up YouTube, Capital G here once again talking about banned cards in this video. Sometimes when Konami releases a card, it's just apparent from the absolute start that it's way too broken and it's pretty much destined to be on the ban list. Take Spellbook of Judgment, Dark Strike Fighter, or Chaos Emperor Dragon for instance. On the other hand, there are times where you can see great potential in a card and you realize that it's only a matter of time before something comes along and breaks it. This would be the case for Rescue Cat and Future Fusion. Well, these 10 cards are actually neither of those and were complete shocks to just about everyone in the Yu-Gi-Oh community, whether it be Konami going completely overboard with an overzealous hit or the card becoming part of a potentially prominent OTK FTK even a decade after its release. These are 10 cards that got the ban hammer when for the most part no one expected it. Now just for clarification, I'll be using people's initial expectations and opinions of the card when it was first released, so we won't be using hindsight or knowledge of the future here. This will also be based on the Yu-Gi-Oh TCG ban list, as the OCG list is a completely different can of worms for another video. Without further ado, welcome to the top 10 Yu-Gi-Oh cards no one ever saw getting banned, the Yu-Gi-Oh hierarchy. Number 10, Digusto Emerald. Let's start the list off with one of the best utility rank 4 cards ever to be released, and while that is a pretty strong statement, it's also the same reason that I largely consider this ban to be shocking. Digusto Emerald was always a strong card because it gave decks the ability to recover much needed resources from the graveyard to further fuel their plays and at the same time get themselves a nice little draw. Sure, it did some crazy things when combined with the Zodiac Fusion Substitute combo. Decks like Gem Knights could also play Brilliant Fusion and they could summon vanilla monsters back from the graveyard. But did anyone actually think that Digusto Emerald was ever an overpowered card? It always felt, much like its title, just another great utility card that was extremely useful, a la Castel or Tornado Dragon. What happened then? Digusto Emerald was actually the centerpiece of an Infernity FTK that was used to summon back Gaia Saber, the Lightning Shadow, the Link monster. I personally think Konami should have hit other cards like Firewall Dragon, but in the end that didn't happen. Number 9, Butterfly Dagger Elma. So everyone knows about the FTK loops now over a decade and a half after Elma was released, but when Elma first came out in the Duel Monsters era, Yu-Gi-Oh was quite different and it was common to see people main decking multiple equipped spells that did nothing except raise your monster's attack. Cards like Axe of Despair, Mage Power, and another card that will end up being on this list were highly sought after and could actually be pretty insane when combined with Hayabusa Knight or Mahavelo. Then we got this relatively weak by comparison equipped spell in the set Dark Crisis, and people in the Yu-Gi-Oh community were definitely split on it. Some argued that the 300 attack game was just way too weak to be even worth the trouble, while others said its ability to constantly go back to your hand meant that it could give you a tiny bit of an extra punch as long as you had monsters to equip it to. And of course there's the elephant in the room that was Elma's interaction with Gearfried the Iron Knight, where it could be played infinitely on the card. At first glance it seemed pretty pointless, but then people discovered those endless activations could lead to infinite draws with things like Royal Magical Library to draw out Exodia, and the FTK was created. While it was very inconsistent, Konami knew that this would be the first of many to come and decided to axe the dagger instead. Number 8, Trap Dust Shoot. This is actually one of the most baffling ones on this list. Trap Dust Shoot was more so a victim of its environment than anything. What do I mean exactly? Trap Dust Shoot, while absolutely incredible, didn't see any real meta play until the GX era, which was actually about 3 years after its release in Pharaonic Guardian. For the most part, people thought that the card was too slow and situational for the competitive meta. Sounds absolutely absurd, right? Yeah. Thinking back at those times, it probably was. I think that a lot of this was actually us being spoiled by the fact that we had the Forceful Sentry, Confiscation, and Delinquent Duo all legal, which in case you didn't know, were all absurdly powerful, and being spells, you could hit cards out of your opponent's hand immediately. During the GX era, when all of those cards were banned and taken out of the game, it took just one smart duelist to realize Trap Dust Shoot was a damn win condition if you drew it in your opening hand. It went from 0 to hero staple status in the span of like a month, and if you opened it going first, not only did you get to look at your opponent's entire opening hand, but you could strip them of their most useful monster. If your opponent didn't have any monsters, then they were probably screwed anyways, and you still got all the information of their entire hand. Funny how it went from slow and situational to absolutely format defining. Number 7, Morphing Jar number 2. Konami has a really weird history with the jar cards, especially if you played during the DM era where things were incredibly loopy as they were all legal. Konami kept making new jar cards, which gave the players the impression that they either liked them or they wanted us to, but at the same time they kept limiting them because they were too powerful, or in Fiber Jar's case, they were just too disruptive for the game at hand. While it was entirely understandable to see cards like Cyber Fiber and Morphing Jar number 1 banned, Morphing Jar number 2 always felt like the odd man out. The card wasn't really good for anything but trolling. It didn't have insane Dark World plays like Morphing Jar number 1. It didn't let you reuse all your burn cards like Fiber Jar. Sure, it could clear your opponent's monsters off the board, but it also ensured that they got new ones as well. Many will say that it was great for deck out strategies, and it was okay for that, but that was hardly ever a competitive strategy, and it never once topped the Shonen Jump Championship. Morphing Jar number 2 always felt like it was more annoying than the card was actually good, so it was kind of shocking that it got the boot with the other jars. Number 6, Kaiser Coliseum. A lot of people probably don't even realize how old this card actually is, and that's largely because it went a decade before it saw play in decks. Kaiser Coliseum was released all the way back in Magician's Force, but didn't make a competitive impact until the Zexal era. A lot of this had to do with people not really seeing the utility of the card. However, with the release of the Bujin archetype, we got just what the doctor ordered, a deck that could naturally play well with only one monster on the field, and that monster could get slowly but surely harder to kill each turn. This wasn't some impossible to summon boss monster, it was just a regular level 4 Bujin Yamato that was also searchable from Fire Formation Tenki. Kaiser also saw play in Cosmo when paired with Dart Destroyer for similar results. Even with the competitive success of the Floodgate, the banning was still a huge shock, made even more unbelievable by the fact that it was the only banned card on that specific ban list. Players still aren't even sure if it was because of the card itself or because of ruling issues. Number 5, Grand Soil, the Elemental Lord. Hard once per turn effect or not, banned card effects or not, no one ever thought that any of the Elemental Lord cards would actually end up being banned like the cards their effects were based off of. This is just another example of wrong place at the wrong time. Grand Soil was only relevant for a hot second in Jeff Jones' Psychic deck that took second place one time at a YCS event, but outside of that, people largely considered the Elemental Lord cards just too difficult to summon, as they needed a specific number of attribute monsters to be in the graveyard before they were actually hitting the field. These cards were basically the exact opposite of the Dragon Rulers. However, Grand Soil got banned because it was used in an Infernity powered FTK where he could be summoned multiple times in a turn. This led to Konami banning the card to kill the FTK, and eventually they ended up deciding to just errata him into a hard once per turn like his other Elemental Lord counterpart so that he could be played in the new Element Saber archetype. Number 4, Super Rejuvenation. You probably noticed by now that a lot of cards on this list are from the Duel Monsters era, and that's largely because Konami was super loose with card design back then. That's how stupid cards like Fiber Jar and Imperial Order got created. Super Rejuvenation is not actually a case like this. Back during Legacy of Darkness, Konami made a legitimate effort to make dragons feel like more than just Blue Eyes, Lord of D, and Flute of Summoning a bunch of big ass dragons deck. They gave us cards like Spear Dragon, Troop Dragon, Tyrant Dragon, a Wing Beat of Giant Dragon, as well as the 100% completely ignored Super Rejuvenation. At the time, the intent was to basically help dragons recover from tribute summoning two tribute monsters like Tyrant and Yamato Dragon, perfectly understandable and fairly situational, which is why it never saw play or really received any attention. Then a decade later, Konami had forgotten they even made this card, they created the Dragon Rulers, and obviously all hell broke loose. You saw people draw as many as 6 cards during their end phase. It's pretty crazy that in the end they banned it because it's still really lackluster without the Dragon Rulers, which are also banned. Number 3, Injection Fairy Lily. Depending on whom you asked upon its release in Legacy of Darkness, Lily ranged from amazing and deserving of being one of only 2 secret rares in the entire set to overhyped as hell and causes its owner more grief than success. Lily was and still is a very high risk, high reward card. Back during the DM era, it was unheard of to have a level 3 monster take down a Blue Eyes White Dragon with absolutely no aid at all. That, and she hit like an absolute truck when attacking directly correctly as well. In my opinion, she was a pretty solid card that could be useful in a lot of situations, but the undeniable truth is Lily was never even a top 5 card in her own set, let alone ban worthy. Need I remind you that Legacy of Darkness gave us format definers / destroyers like Yada Gurasu, the card that essentially created the need for a ban list. Royal Oppression, Fiber Jar, Last Turn, Reinforcements of the Army, to name a few. Projecting Lily would be banned over any of those cards would have been considered laughable. However, on the second ban list ever, that's exactly what happened. Number 2, United We Stand. If you really go back and look at a lot of the ban lists during the DM era when Konami actually started banning cards, you might think that they had no fucking idea what they were actually doing, and you'd basically be right. This is one of the stupidest bans in Yu-Gi-Oh history in my opinion. For starters, while United We Stand was very powerful upon its release alongside Mage Power and Labyrinth of Nightmare, with its incredibly high 4,000 attack gain ceiling, it was never actually thought of as a card that would just win a game. That's because you could only rack up 4 monsters easily with using something like Scapegoat. People acknowledged that this play was strong, but it was pretty much the only broken play associated with United We Stand, despite the massive potential. No one ever thought that this fairly linear play would be enough to get the card taken out of the game, but once again, the players had yet to realize just how stupid Konami could be. At the start of GOAT format, Konami actually banned United We Stand, which is one of the reasons why you never see the card actually used in GOAT format duels. Looking back, maybe they actually predicted GOAT format and how popular Scapegoat would become. That could be probably the only logical reason I could think of as to why this card was banned and then immediately came back into the game 6 months later. Honorable mentions include Double Iris Magician, Super Polymerization, Mind Master, Fishborg Blaster, and all the Baby Dragon Rulers. Finally, to our number 1, the Tyrant Neptune. If you even knew what this card was before Lyralus Independent Nightingale, then you're either a Jim Crocodile Cook fan from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX or just some sort of Yu-Gi-Oh! Encyclopedia. This is the very definition of obscure, which is why it was so shocking that a card that was invisible in every meaning of the word would suddenly get banned 7 years after it was released. Well, if this list has taught you anything, it's that all it takes is a random interaction. The Tyrant Neptune actually became a little bit of an overnight celebrity in Yu-Gi-Oh! With the reveal of Independent Nightingale, as he could be used to copy her effect when you tribute summoned for him. This could give you massive burn damage, and it would not only be a 6,000 attack monster, but it was unaffected by all other card effects. This gave your opponent basically 1 turn to out it or just flat out lose, and they only had 2,000 life points to out the card as well. Being an older card that didn't actually benefit an archetype Konami was trying to push, they ended up banning the Tyrant Neptune before it had a chance to actually become a menace. So let me know what you guys thought of my list, and thank you to everybody on the live stream who helped me actually make it. I think that we did a pretty good job. If there were any other cards that were shocking when they got banned, leave it in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.